One of the ways I use ILT is to help me embed equality, diversity and inclusion, as it's now called. I do it in class, of course. We have discussions and so on, but I use the VLE, or the blog as it is, to back that up and use that in class as well, just to illustrate some of the points we're talking about, so that it's subject relevant. And it's not generic equality and diversity statistics and things like that. It's actually pertinent to what they're going to do in a project. This is an example of one of the virtual learning environments I have in my classes. So in terms of equality and diversity and inclusion, whilst we do the main work in class, I back it up with resources on the blog of the virtual learning environment I've got here. Partly that's to show on the large screen in the classroom so we can do it in class, but it's also so they can work on it at home and do some further work. So if we have a look at one of those resources, so I just click on the page, and this is what learners do at home. And you can see now we've got the page Equality and Diversity Resources. We have the quiz there, but I want to take us down to the one where we looked at gender, because that was really useful because we were able to actually use artists and their work. So here's an example of one of the resources in the Equality and Diversity page on the blog. I will have this on screen, on the big screen in class. And what I do first is, I hide the title so they can't see the word woman. And we just look at some of the pictures. And then I ask them, think of your favourite artists, and they tell me their favourite artists. And almost without exception, they don't refer to a female artist. And then we use that as the opportunity to talk around equality and the visibility of women. And then we look at some of these examples in the class, and then these are available for them online as well. And then at the bottom, they're all numbered, and then at the bottom we have the links for further learning, so they can take the learning further. And I asked them to have a look, whichever artist took their fancy, whichever one they liked, or one of the sites that's there below, just to sort of click down on one of the links, for example, and then say, okay, just find me one thing that stood out for you and bring it back next week, and we'll just talk about it for a few minutes, and then we'll get back into our main project. So what I ask them to do is just click on one of the pictures that takes their interest, and then they can have a look at that in a bit more detail. So if we click on here, so by clicking on the image, that gives them the option then, if they wish to, at home, they can print this off on their printer at home, or they can just download it to their computer if they've got one, and then bring back whatever it is they've found that they want to talk about the next week in the class.
I've developed a lot of resources in my practice for both maths and English, and here's one example I'd like to share with you now. I designed this when I was teaching a maths session. It was around decimals. So just as a little starter activity, I put this up on the board. Obviously you could use this on an interactive whiteboard if you had one. In this particular session I didn't. So what I did was I blew this up on the flip chart, and it was just a quick little matching activity. So what they did was, this column here is obviously all of the countries, and over in this column we have the currencies. And what they had to do, we did this as a group discussion, we had to match up the country with the currency from that country. So I put USA at the top because obviously that's one that people would recognise as dollar. And then what they then did was they started to then shout out, oh, we know where euro's from. I'd put euro in because next to Turkey, because obviously that's not in the euro yet, and there's been a lot of discussion in the media about that. So we actually had a lot of discussion there about Turkey not being in the euro. And obviously some of the more difficult ones, I had to support them with, like the baht and the dirhams, but with a little bit of support they did get it. So they were just basically matching them across.
The way I embedded E&D, equality and diversity, within my lesson was again using the interactive whiteboard. We had a round robin of within the class. The learners were invited up to the board and they wrote down their favourite food and where they thought it came from. Every learner was invited up to participate in this. We discovered my personal favourite was Chinese, came from China. We had lots of people preferred Indian food. There was learners within the group from other ethnic groups, which was really interesting because they brought in their own food tastes, which highlighted the fact that all of these foods we wouldn't have without a diverse society.
I believe the diverse of topics that we've covered with Maria is the fact that we've covered discrimination, which really helps me personally for my future in the Royal Air Force. I'm hoping to be a weapons system operator, and I really struggled before I joined the course with confidence to be able to go into different cultures, and I really found the fact that I'm going to be in a diverse society quite scary in a way, the fact that all these different people and different, all in one place. But being at the Dryden Centre in this course, it's really supported us to be able to go into these different cultures.
I'd like to share with you one of the ways in which I embed equality and diversity into my lessons. This little game that I made up focuses around Indian jewellery and body adornment. However, that's not the main focus of it. The focus is to try and get learners to develop some emotional intelligence, to put themselves in somebody else's shoes and see exactly how they would feel. The point I come to at the end is that often we think of Indian jewellery as being rather gaudy because it's such high quality gold. In fact, gold jewellery was the only thing that a woman was allowed to own. She wasn't even allowed the key to her own front door. Therefore, she carried her wealth on her back, or on her wrist, or around her neck. If she fell on hard times, she would cut a little bit out of the gold bangle and be able to sell it to feed her children. That's the focus of it, and I want them to think quite deeply about how they would feel in that situation. The game is very simple. I have pictures of a lady, and then I've cut out some pictures of Indian body jewellery, body adornment. This one's called a tika, and it slots there. And I've cut out the names of each piece of jewellery. So I divide my learners up into groups, and I'd give them a pack of pictures and a pack of cards, and they'd be encouraged to talk amongst each other and see if they can sort out what goes where. I'd like to share with you another way in which I embed equality and diversity into my lessons. I think it's very important that whatever you introduce in the terms of equality and diversity is relevant to the subject you're teaching. I thought of an idea for World Refugee Day, and it involved Huguenots, silversmiths fleeing France after the Edict of Nantes was abolished and they were no longer allowed to live and work in France. That's the first time the word refugee was used in this country. Also, I can then talk about how wonderful the Huguenot silversmiths were, how they brought on our silversmithing leaps and bounds. Also, they were pretty much enslaved to the owners of the hallmarks because they weren't allowed to register themselves. So you can then get into a discussion about enslavement.
How I embed equality diversity is an activity called Sink and Ship. This is actually an activity that I used to use in a previous job for team building, but I realised the importance of this as a speaking and listening activity when the functional skills English came about, because it really gets the learners involved and really evokes lots of discussion on equality and diversity. As you can see on the screen, this is basically just an activity, and it's got 9 passengers on a ship. So for example, we've got a member of Parliament who was aged 67. So this is basically designed that these are all different members of society, completely different, equal and diverse. Then what they have to do is have a look at them. The only piece of information you've got is, like I say, a title, if you like, and then an age. Then you've got this little brief, which is basically the only available lifeboat, which can carry them 5 miles, can take a maximum of 6 people. So you've basically got to leave 3 behind. And they have to decide in groups, so I put them into teams, which 3 they're going to leave behind. What I don't do at this point is give them there's a right or wrong answer, and I don't tell them it's equality and diversity. I just put this into the session and give it out. So then what they have to do is then decide in the group, which evokes a lot of discussion. For example, a lot of them tend to get rid of the MP straight away. A couple of reasons for that. A is an MP, and a lot of people don't like politics at the moment, especially in this part of the world, but also because of his age, and they tend to write him off because of his age. Alternative though, we have older members of the group that say, well, I'm old and I don't want to go in the sinking ship, so they tend to relate it to their own selves, or people that they know. One of the other people that they often focus on is the disabled man, and again this can go 2 ways. Some learners who actually have a disability themselves recognise themselves as the disabled man and will say, I want to save the disabled man. However, those people who have less understanding about the range of disabilities often say this is a physical impairment in some way and say, no, you need to chuck him off the boat because he's going to be an impairment in some way. He's going to hinder the expedition, or if they're saved. That then leads to a very good discussion around hidden disabilities, things like autistic spectrum disorder, dyspraxia, visual impairment, and we look at the range of disabilities, but also how people can work around those and quite effectively work around these disabilities. People like Richard Branson, who very well known, has got dyslexia and ADHD, wouldn't be where he was without those disabilities. So would we throw Richard Branson off this ship? And that obviously makes them think about it from a different perspective. One of the other things that comes up when we're talking about the disabled man is the potential health and safety implications. And learners will say things like, oh yeah, because if he's in a wheelchair, we're not going to be able to get him off the boat, and you know, someone might have to carry him. And I say things like, well, is he disabled in that way? Do we know that? And then that gets them thinking, and obviously we have learners within the group often that do have a disability. I can think of one occasion when I was doing this, and two of the learners, for example, have walking sticks because they've got mobility issues. I said, so are we not going to take those learners with us, even though they've got valuable assets in other ways? And that really makes them think about how they judge people, in that, you know, you can make these minor adjustments to help people be part of the group rather than excluding them automatically based on their disability.
I'd like to share with you today about how I embedded equality and diversity in one of my family maths sessions. This 6 weeks programme for family maths was to look at how children learn addition, multiplication, subtraction and division, geared to how they learn in school. So the parents, grandparents and carers and the children took part in the sessions each week. This particular session on division was looking at the chunking methods and number lines that children use in school, a topic which parents, grandparents and carers are not familiar with at all because it's a relatively new method used in schools. So I introduced two elements to this family maths session around division, and it was first of all to look at what was called a traditional Cuman maths method, originated in Japan but now brought into this country and actually used worldwide. This method involves repetition and very quick calculation without the use of a calculator. So the article on this Cuman maths method, this repetition method, the parents and grandparents looked at this article and we discussed it. As well as that, I introduced discussions around how Japanese children learn a traditional way of maths method in their country, which is using the abacus. And we introduced a YouTube clip which shows the children using that method as well. What was really good was the amount of discussion that was generated out of looking at these two methods, and also thinking about how children learn in school and also how parents used to learn. And there was a very good discussion about is it better to learn by rote and to learn fast and quick and against the clock with repetition, or is it better to learn with methods where you have 2 or 3 choices to go around and approach that topic? So this was a really useful discussion.